The hiss of escaping gas filled the silent chamber as the cryogenic pod released centuries of frozen time. Frost cracked and melted away, condensation dripping down the reinforced glass as the dim emergency lights cast eerie red reflections on its surface. Inside, Captain Elias Mercer's eyelids twitched before they fluttered open, his pupils dilating as his body struggled to react to consciousness after an unnatural slumber. His limbs were stiff, his muscles barely responding, and his lungs burned as he took his first ragged breath in what felt like an eternity. The moment stretched on, his heart hammering against his ribs as the pod fully unlocked with a final mechanical whir. The heavy lid lifted, releasing a burst of chilled vapor that curled through the stagnant air like a ghost of time lost. Mercer groaned as he tried to move, his body sluggish, fighting against atrophy. Every joint screamed in protest as he forced himself upright, his hands gripping the edge of the pod to steady himself. His breath came fast, uneven, his mind disoriented and struggling to grasp the reality of the moment. Where was the rest of his crew? Why was the ship so silent? The cryo bay should have been bustling with activity, filled with the sounds of waking officers, medical teams monitoring vitals, and engineers ensuring systems were running at full capacity. Instead, there was nothing but stillness. Something was wrong. The dim emergency lighting flickered overhead, casting long shadows across the chamber. The walls were lined with additional cryopods, each one identical to his own, except they weren't waking. Mercer's brow furrowed as his sluggish mind processed the sight. Some pods were intact but unresponsive. Others were shattered, their reinforced glass fractured outward as if something had burst free. His stomach twisted at the sight of one in particular, its interior coated with dark, brittle residue that looked disturbingly aorganic. A shiver crawled up his spine that had nothing to do with the cold. Swallowing hard, he turned his attention to the nearby console, dragging himself toward it with shaky legs. His balance wavered, but he gritted his teeth and pushed forward, determination overriding the weakness in his limbs. The console was caked in dust, its surface worn with age far beyond what should have been possible. He reached out, fingers brushing across the inactive screen before it suddenly flickered to life with a hum. A distorted voice crackled through the ship's calm system, distant yet unmistakable. Captain Mercer, you are 400 years overdue for reawakening. The words struck him like a physical blow. His breath hitched, his pulse pounding in his ears as the weight of the statement settled over him. 400 years. That wasn't possible. His mission had been standard exploration, with a planned duration of 20 years at most. The ship's AI, or Aora, should have revived the crew long before now. So why had it taken 4 centuries? And why was he the only one awake? He inhaled sharply, forcing his voice past dry, cracked lips. Or Aora, what the hell happened? Static filled the air for a moment before the AI responded, her voice laced with an almost imperceptible strain. Catastrophic failure of primary systems. Cryogenic sequence interrupted due to external interference. The crew did not survive. The final words carried a chilling finality, and Mercer's knees nearly buckled. His fingers gripped the edge of the console, his knuckles turning white. His crew, his people, gone. The reality of it pressed against his chest like a crushing weight, threatening to suffocate him. But grief would have to wait. There were too many unanswered questions. His jaw tightened, and his voice steadied. External interference? What kind of interference? The screen flickered again, a grainy feed attempting to play. The image stabilized just long enough for Mercer to glimpse what looked like weapons fire. Explosions ripping through the ship's hull, alarms blaring, people shouting. Then, darkness. Hostile engagement detected, or Aora confirmed. Enemy forces boarded the Odyssey. Defense systems were compromised. Evacuation was not possible. His mind reeled. Who had attacked them? His ship had been part of a peaceful exploratory fleet, charting unclaimed sectors far beyond the known colonies. They had no enemies, at least, none they had known about. And now, centuries had passed. The universe had moved on without him. The thought was staggering, overwhelming, but Mercer shoved the emotions aside. He could process it later. Right now, he needed information. He needed to know where he was, who had done this, and whether anyone else from humanity was still out there. His fingers danced over the console, coaxing whatever remaining power the system had to provide him with a scan. The results were grim. Most decks were inoperable. Life support was failing. Power reserves were critically low. And outside, he sucked in a sharp breath as the ship's external cameras powered on. The view beyond the fractured sent a chill through his core. The stars were different and familiar. But it was the debris field that truly made his blood run cold. Wreckage drifted in the void, hulking remains of battleships, shattered stations, and countless smaller vessels, all long dead. Whatever war had occurred, it had been devastating. And humanity, there was no sign of them. His hands curled into fists, a slow, burning resolve building within his chest. He wasn't sure what had happened, but he would find out. He wasn't ready to accept that he was the last. Someone had to be out there. And if they weren't, he would make whoever was responsible for humanity's fall answer for it. With renewed purpose, he pushed himself upright, ignoring the lingering weakness in his body. He wasn't just a man waking up from anymore. He was a relic of a forgotten past, a ghost of a lost civilization. But ghosts had a way of haunting those who had wronged them. And Captain Elias Mercer wasn't done fighting yet. Mercer gritted his teeth as he stumbled through the dimly lit corridor, his muscles still sluggish from, but his mind with urgency. The emergency lights flickered, casting eerie shadows along the walls, and every step sent a dull ache through his atrophied legs. He forced himself forward, gripping the cold metal of the bulkhead for support. The silence of the ship was oppressive, broken only by the occasional transmission from Aurora. Captain, power reserves critical. Life support failure in approximately 14 hours. Mercer exhaled sharply. 400 years alone, and now he was on borrowed time. He needed to find a way to stabilize the ship, get a clearer picture of what had happened, and, if possible, contact someone. Anyone. If there was still anyone left to hear him. His mind raced as he pushed into what remained of the operations deck. The doors, once sleek and pristine, were scorched from weapons fire, jagged holes punched through the reinforced metal. Something had fought its way in here a long time ago. The sight made his stomach twist. He swallowed hard and stepped inside. The main flickered with failing light, barely functioning, but still operational. He ran his fingers over the console, his breath steadying as he forced his hands to work through the stiffness. A low hum filled the room as the central display struggled to boot up, projecting a distorted star map. Mercer narrowed his eyes, trying to make sense of the coordinates. He was nowhere near his last-known location. The Odyssey had drifted, or been dragged, far beyond space. Aurora, he said, was yours. Do we have any record of how far we've traveled? The AI responded, her voice laced with static. Negative. Navigation logs corrupted. However, stellar drift calculations estimate the Odyssey has moved approximately 120 from its original coordinates. Mercer clenched his jaw. That was impossible. The ship wasn't designed for travel without a functioning crew, and the damage to the hull suggested they hadn't exactly made the trip unscathed. Something or someone had moved them, and the implications of that sent a shiver down his spine. He focused on the fingers working through the degraded system files, trying to find anything that would give him an idea of what had happened. Fragments of corrupted logs flickered, better reports, desperate distress calls, and then silence. The last recorded entry was from an officer he didn't recognize. The grainy video feed sputtered to life, revealing a haggard woman in a tattered uniform, her face smeared with grime and blood. This is Lieutenant Aryavas, acting commandant of the Odyssey. If anyone finds this, humanity is gone. The war, it's over. We lost. Mercer's blood ran cold. He watched, barely breathing, as the message continued. We held out as long as we could. The syndicate, they came in waves. We weren't ready. No one was. It wasn't just them either. Others joined in. We were outnumbered, outgunned. The colonies fell first. Earth, we lost contact with Earth 2 years into the war. No one knows if it even survived the bombardments. We tried to run. That's all we could do. Run and hide. The Odyssey was one of the last ships left. But they found us. They boarded. Killed most of the crew. We managed to send a distress call. But I don't think anyone's left to hear it. Her expression darkened, her voice lowering to a whisper. If you find this, and you're human, don't let them find you. The syndicate doesn't just want us dead. They want us erased. The feed cut out. Mercer stared at the empty screen, his pulse pounding. The words echoed in his head. Humanity is gone. No, he refused to believe that. Someone had to be out there. There was no way an entire species had just vanished without a trace. He clenched his fists, breathing through the surge of emotions threatening to overtake him. He had woken up 400 years too late, but he was still here. And as long as he was here, humanity wasn't finished. He turned back to the console, determination hardening in his chest. Aurora, what's the status of the communications array? A long pause. Then, minimal functionality. Capabilities disabled. Local transmissions possible within a radius. Mercer exhaled slowly. Not much, but it was a start. Can we scan for signals? Any signs of life? Scanning, Aurora responded. The seconds stretched into what felt like an eternity. Then, when anomalous reading detected. Faint distress beacon. Approximately 3.7 from current location. Mercer's heart leapt. A distress beacon. It could be a trap. It could be nothing. But it could also be proof that humanity wasn't gone. That someone had survived. He straightened, rolling the stiffness from his shoulders. Aurora, prep the ship's thrusters. Get me whatever power we have left for propulsion. Warning, engaging thrusters will accelerate life support depletion. I don't care, Mercer snapped. We have 14 hours of air. If there's a chance someone's out there, I'm taking it. A beat of silence. Then, acknowledged, Captain. The ship groaned as its ancient engines rumbled to life, the deck trembling beneath his feet. Mercer braced himself, staring out into the endless void. He had no idea what he would find when he reached that signal. But he knew one thing for certain. If there was even the smallest ember of humanity still burning in the darkness, he would find it. And if the syndicate was still out there, still hunting, still erasing his people from history, then they had made one fatal mistake. Mercer's grip tightened on the control panel as the Odyssey dropped out of FTL, the ancient ship groaning in protest from the strain. Filled with the eerie glow of a dying star, its light casting long shadows over the jagged remnants of a shattered space station. Massive chunks of debris floated aimlessly, the last remnants of whatever civilization had once called this place home. But Mercer wasn't here for ruins. He was here for the signal. The distress beacon pulsed weakly in the darkness, a rhythmic flicker against the backdrop of deep space. Aurora's voice crackled through the ship's speakers. Signal source located. Originating from within the station's remains. Life signs undetermined. Scans are inconclusive due to interference. Mercer exhaled, his breath fogging slightly in the chilled air of the failing ship. He had hoped for something more. A ship. A settlement. Some undeniable proof that he wasn't alone. Instead, he was staring at a graveyard. But even a graveyard could hold secrets. He pushed away his doubts and focused. Any signs of activity? Ships, energy signatures. Aurora's pause was brief. No active vessels detected. Residual energy traces suggest past combat, but nothing recent. That was both a relief and a concern. Whoever had been here before was long gone. But that didn't mean whatever had happened here was finished. He needed to move carefully. Mercer powered down the ship to minimum emissions, letting the Odyssey drift as he suited up. The weight of the EVA gear felt unnatural after centuries in cryo, but his body was remembering faster than he expected. He attached the to his boots, slung his rifle over his shoulder, and activated his helmet's HUD. Aurora's voice followed him as he moved to the airlock. Captain, structural integrity of the station is highly compromised. Caution is advised. Noted, Mercer muttered, cycling the airlock. A moment later, he stepped into the void. The silence of space pressed against him as he drifted toward the broken station. The closer he got, the more unsettling the damage became. The station hadn't just been attacked, it had been torn apart. Sections were ripped open as if something had burst through them from the inside. The metal was warped, scorched, and in some places, melted into grotesque, twisted shapes. Something very bad had happened here. Mercer gritted his teeth and pressed forward, his thrusters guiding him toward the beacon's signal. He landed lightly on what remained of an exterior docking platform, thus securing him against the derelict structure. Inside, the station was worse. The hallways were dark, save for the occasional flicker of failing emergency lights. Walls were lined with scorch marks, evidence of gunfire and plasma burns. Debris floated in the environment, shattered helmets, broken weapons, the occasional skeletal remains still locked in what had once been desperate battle stances. Whatever had attacked this place hadn't left survivors. Mercer felt his pulse quicken but forced himself to stay focused. He followed his HUD's navigation toward the distress beacon, passing through empty corridors that felt more like tombs than passageways. A soft ping alerted him as he reached his destination. A central operations room, barely intact, its consoles flickering weakly as they struggled against centuries of decay. At the center of the room, a beacon pulsed a faint, blue light, a small, battered device connected to what remained of the station's mainframe. Mercer approached cautiously, scanning the area before kneeling to inspect the beacon. It was old. That alone sent a jolt through him. Someone had been here after Earth had fallen. Someone had set this beacon, hoping against hope that someone else would find it. He powered up the beacon's last recorded message. Static crackled, and then a voice, weak, distorted, but unmistakably human. If anyone finds this, we tried. We fought, but we couldn't stop it. They weren't syndicate, they were something worse. Something ancient. We dug too deep, woke something up. The station, the fleet, all gone. If you're hearing this, run. They don't stop. They don't die. They just consume. The message ended in a burst of static. Mercer stared at the device, his mind racing. This wasn't just a graveyard. It was a warning. A sharp noise behind him made his blood turn to ice. A faint, scraping sound, like meta on meta, echoing through the ruined station. Slowly, he turned. The corridor he had come through was empty, but something had changed. A shadow, just barely visible in the dim emergency lights, shifted in the distance. His breath hitched. Not possible. The station was dead. Aurora's voice whispered urgently in his ear. Captain, motion detected. Unknown entity approaching. Mercer's grip tightened around his rifle as he switched his HUD to thermal imaging. At first, there was nothing. Then, movement. A shape, humanoid but wrong, flickered in the overlay. It was tall, elongated, its limbs too long, its body pulsing with faint bioluminescence. And it was watching him. The moment Mercer locked eyes with the thing, it moved. Faster than anything should be able to in. Mercer barely had time to raise his weapon before the creature slammed into him, sending them both tumbling through the ruined operations room. Alarms blared in his helmet as he struggled to regain control, his rifle barking in short, controlled bursts. The rounds struck home, tearing into the creature's flesh, but it didn't stop. It screeched, an unnatural, grating sound that vibrated in his bones, and lashed out with clawed fingers. Mercer twisted away just in time, the appendages scraping against his armor instead of cutting through. He fired again, this time aiming for its head. The bullets struck, and the creature convulsed before its body went limp, floating weightlessly in the environment. Mercer didn't wait to see if it would get back up. He pushed off the console, kicking himself backward toward the exit. Aurora prepped the ship. Now. Acknowledged. He shot through the ruined halvus, ignoring the bodies, the ruins, the warning messages blaring through his HUD. He could feel something behind him, even before the motion tracker lit up with more contacts. Not one, not two, dozens. They poured from the shadows, their glowing eyes locking onto him. Mercer gritted his teeth, adjusting his trajectory as he reached the outer hull. He could see the Odyssey, its airlock open, waiting. He didn't stop, didn't look back. He activated his thrusters and launched himself toward salvation. He slammed into the airlock, hitting the override before collapsing against the wall as it sealed shut. His breath was ragged, his heart pounding, but he was alive. Aurora, he gasped. Get us the hell out of here. The engines roared to life. He saw them. Dozens of glowing eyes watching as the station drifted further and further away. And then, just as the Odyssey jumped to FTL, he saw the worst thing of all. Mercer sat in the cockpit of the Odyssey, his hands gripping the controls tighter than necessary. The ship hummed around him, the familiar vibrations of FTL travel a soothing contrast to the chaos he had barely escaped. His breath was still uneven, his mind replaying the last moments aboard the station. The eerie distress call, the impossible creatures, the glowing eyes watching him as he fled. The fact that they hadn't followed him into space should have been reassuring. But it wasn't. It only raised more questions. Aurora's voice cut through his thoughts, calm as ever. Captain, we are on course for the nearest human outpost. Estimated time of arrival, hours. He exhaled, leaning back in his chair. Good. Any sign of pursuit? The AI took a beat before responding. Negative. No vessels detected on sensors. However, residual energy readings from the station suggest non-standard gravitational distortions before our departure. Mercer frowned. Meaning? Aurora's synthetic voice remained neutral. Anomalies inconsistent with known FTL signatures. The station's spatial integrity may be compromised beyond natural decay. He ran a hand down his face. So, either the station is falling apart in a weird way, or something unnatural is keeping it together. The implications settled heavily in his chest. He stood, stretching his stiff limbs before stepping out of the cockpit. The Odyssey was an old ship, a relic even before he had been put into cryo. But she had held together when he needed her most. The narrow corridors and dim lighting felt almost comforting now. At least here, he knew what he was dealing with. The same couldn't be said about whatever was lurking in that station. He needed answers. Making his way to the small command terminal in the center of the ship, he pulled up the data he had ripped from the station's beacon. Files scrolled past in a chaotic mess of corrupted logs and incomplete transmissions. Most of it was unreadable, but a few fragments stood out. He clicked on one at random. The screen flickered, and an old video log played. A grainy image of a man in a uniform appeared, dark circles under his eyes, a desperate look on his face. We were wrong, the man muttered, his voice barely above a whisper. The syndicate wasn't the worst of it. We thought they were the apex predators out here. Thought that once we beat them back, we'd be safe. But we dug too deep. We found things that were never meant to be found. His eyes flicked to something, and for a moment, pure terror crossed his face. If you're hearing this, leave. Get as far away from this place as you can. They don't die. They just change. The video cut out abruptly. Mercer sat back, his jaw clenched. He had seen things in his time. War, death, the fall of Earth. But something about this sent a deeper chill through him. The Syndicate had been humanity's greatest enemy for centuries, an empire of ruthless conquerors. But this man, whoever he was, had been more afraid of something else. Something that had wiped out an entire station. Mercer had nearly been among them. He accessed another file, this one an audio recording with heavy static interference. A female voice, urgent, spoke through the distortion. Don't understand what we've unleashed. It's not just biological. It's, the message cut out, then resumed with a strained whisper. They learn. They change. They, more static. Then, a final chilling sentence. They're not trapped here. We are. Mercer slammed the console off, pushing himself away. He forced himself to take a steadying breath. This wasn't just another ghost story of deep space. This was something real. Something that had wiped out an entire fleet and left no survivors. And yet, whatever it was, it hadn't followed him. At least, not yet. Aurora's voice interrupted his spiraling thoughts. Captain, an encrypted transmission is being received on a secured frequency. Mercer's eyes narrowed. From where? Origin unknown. Signal strength suggests a nearby relay, but no vessels are detected within range. His fingers hovered over the console. Play it. A burst of static filled the cabin before resolving into a distorted but familiar voice. Mercer. His blood ran cold. The voice belonged to Captain Elias Reork, his former commandant. A man who had been dead for over 400 years. Mercer swallowed hard. That's not possible, he murmured. Aurora remained silent, waiting for his command. The transmission continued. You shouldn't have come here. You shouldn't have seen this. There was a pause, then a low, crackling breath. But now that you have, it won't let you go. The line went dead. Mercer's hands clenched into fists as he stood abruptly. Trace that signal, he ordered. Aurora responded immediately. Unable to comply. The signal origin does not exist within known space. His jaw tightened. Then where the hell did it come from? Silence stretched between them. Then, Aurora spoke again, her voice softer. Captain, I have detected an anomaly. He didn't like that word. Define anomaly. A faint energy signature matching the station's residual readings is present within the ship. It appears to be moving. His stomach dropped. He had checked his suit before the Odyssey. Nothing had followed him. Or so he had thought. He grabbed his rifle from where it rested against the wall, heart pounding. Where? Aurora took a moment before answering. Engineering deck. Signature is faint, but increasing in strength. Mercer's grip tightened around his weapon as he moved toward the hatch leading to the lower decks. The lights flickered briefly, a minor glitch, most likely. Or something worse. He stepped onto the ladder, descending carefully, his rifle raised. The corridor leading to the engineering section was dimly lit, the hum of the ship's systems masking the sound of his own breathing. Then he saw it. A faint shimmer, barely visible against the dark matter of the corridor, like a mirage in the air. It pulsed, just for a moment, and then shifted. Mercer didn't hesitate. He fired. The rounds struck, but instead of impacting solid flesh, they passed through, distorting the space around it like ripples in water. The thing twitched, then moved. Fast. Too fast. Mercer barely managed to throw himself aside as it lunged, the air itself seeming to bend around it. He hit the deck hard, rolling as he fired again. The shimmer flickered, and for a split second, he saw something underneath, the vague outline of something humanoid, but wrong. Its head tilted, almost curiously, as if studying him. Then it smiled. The ship's alarms blared. Aurora's voice, uncharacteristically urgent, cut through the chaos. Captain, we are no longer alone.